All right, welcome back, everybody. It is Jake Simons, Woodview Elementary, Woodview Eaglebots, head coach, director of robotics for Wani Community Schools, and fifth grade teacher. And I'm here with Adam Gray, who coaches down near Indianapolis. Adam, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
Hey, everybody. I'm Adam Gray. I'm the head coach for Team Work 46168G. I also volunteer and help out at my wife's school, Brentwood Elementary in Plainfield, Indiana. It's 11860. By trade, I'm actually a software engineer working for Salesforce, and robotics is the thing that I spend all of my volunteer time that my company gives us to spend.
Nice. Yeah, today we're going to talk to you guys about competitiveness. We feel like we have a great deal of respect for each other's programs. That's why we're kind of collaborating on this project. We've actually become pretty good friends through robotics and through this whole initiative. And just bounce ideas off of each other all the time. Really, I just come to Adam for programming help because I stink at it. But we have a great working relationship and friendship here. And we're going to talk to you guys about competitiveness. And just as a preface here, we want to remind you that the things that we do within our organization and in our programs that work may not necessarily work within your organization. And that's okay. But we want you to pick and choose from what we have to say and do with it whatever you want. We're an open book. We're opening up our recipe book and we are just spilling all of our secrets, just letting you know how we run our organization and do with that information what you want.
And one of the things that we've learned over the years, separately and together, is that what works for us doesn't necessarily work for everyone else, but what works for other people sometimes does work for us. So if you have ideas or you have things that are working great for you that we don't highlight here, we'd love to hear about them so that we can implement them and help our kids become even better than they already are.
Yeah, we are all on the same team. We are our team Indiana, and that's really important to remember as we go through the season here.
So before you can even start to really think about being competitive, you have to take stock of what you have and what your team is. How competitive can you be? How competitive do you want to be? So with a couple of our teams at the time, they weren't ready to be super competitive, but they were really, really eager to learn. And what we found through the process of them learning and getting better and improving over the course of the year, they were wanting to get more and more competitive. But here we are at the beginning of the season. This is the preseason. So you have to take stock a little bit. And we have a huge amount of variety in the coaches in these programs. Some of you are just starting out and have very little idea of what you've gotten yourselves into. Some of you could be giving this talk as well. And we have everyone in between. So take stock. How much experience do you have as a coach? How much can you teach your kids? Do you know how to build a reverse 4-bar lift? Or can you at least operate Google and YouTube well enough to find out how when your kids ask you? How about your kids? Do you have some experienced leaders coming back from last year? Or do you have a brand new fresh crop of kids coming in eager to learn? Do you have the support from your school and your community, from your parents? If you don't, how do you get that support? What does that support look like? One of the biggest ways to be more competitive is simply spending a lot more time. So how much time are you willing to spend?
Yes.
How much practice can the kids have? You know, are they willing to give up more afternoons, or are they really busy with, football or soccer or basketball or swimming? So you have to take stock of everything that you have in your program. What assets do you have? Where are you at? Be realistic. You may only have one day a week. You may have 2 days a week. It may only be an hour every so often. Those resources extend beyond just time. They come to your kits and the parts that you have available. Maybe all you have is 2 super kits and you've got 50 kids wanting to be on the teams. How do you handle that? Do you have budget to get more parts? If you do have budget, which parts should you get? But all of these things are questions that you need to be asking yourself right now so that you can have answers coming into the season, so you can be better prepared to help these kids when they are ready to get started.
Yeah, absolutely. And Honestly, one of the first things that we do within our organization is we need to break up the season into smaller chunks, especially for kids. You know how kids are when you have these big goals, these season long goals and expectations. It's hard for them to see how to meet them, and so it's important for you guys to kind of chunk up your season into smaller phases. And so what we do is we have three separate phases. We have our fall phase, our winter phase, and our world's phase if we happen to make it that far. And within your fall phase, that's the beginning of the season. A lot of teams who are competitive start around the August time period. For us at Woodview and the Wani Community Schools, we're starting in July. We are right now, as we speak, like as in this morning, we are running our summer camps. We have 3 weeks of camps going. First week is second and third graders to kind of, whet their appetite a little bit. And then we have fourth and fifth graders going on, and then sixth and seventh grade as well. And during these camps, I'm stepping out of my director position and becoming, especially during the fourth and fifth grade week, stepping into my coaching role, and I'm scouting. I am looking for students who check all the boxes that I can put on the EagleBots team, and that happens in July. And then school starts in August, maybe this year for us, and then in early to mid September is when I have my parent nights that kind of gauge the interest, and the kids can pick up applications and go through that process. And then by early October, I'm picking teams and picking students, putting them on their sub teams and giving them their roles and responsibilities. We have on here on this slide, they need to build and drive rise and then compete and start to modify. But one of the things one of the benefits of running the camps is they build and drive rise, which is this year's hero bot that goes with the game Rise Above. And so we'll actually get a head start right in October. We'll jump right into our first iteration. I guess it'd be the second one, and just build a fresh robot. Have Rise available for us in case we don't get done by our first competition. But we always like to compete in early November, mid-November, get that first competition under our belt and get that experience, and then obviously start to modify. We have a little note here at the bottom underneath that right there that says extra parts and kits are essential. They so are. And I didn't really realize how essential they were until this quarantine. So I had a couple of my former EagleBots challenge me to like a build contest. And they wanted to do like a kind of a competition at home with tennis balls and golf balls and solo cups and whatnot. And just admittedly, like I stink at building. Like I'm not an engineer person. I'm an elementary teacher, so like I'm not a builder. And so I'm challenging them, and I'm going against them, and I'm building like this awful drivetrain. And you can ask Adam. I was sending him pictures and videos, and he's just making fun of me. I mean, it was bad, but so anyway, like I'm done with my drivetrain with this basic super kit, and I feel like I don't have many parts left. And it dawned on me, I'm like, well, a lot of teams actually just have this super kit to build the Rise bot or whatever to take to competitions. And, thank goodness for George and TechPoint Foundation for providing those for first year coaches and whatnot. I mean, that is an awesome, awesome gift, especially since they're worth what, $380, $400.
$380 right now.
Yeah. But like, you need more. You need to go to vexrobotics.com and you need to buy these add-on kits or maybe even just specific parts. Like you need chains and sprockets, and you need Omni wheels, and you need longer axles and longer 2x beams and 1x beams and odd length stuff and all of those things that don't necessarily come in a regular super kit. So this is where you have to get creative with your fundraising, maybe do a donors choose or ask for sponsorships in your community. There are so many businesses out there within your community that will back this so much. So make sure you do that, because that's definitely something that you need to do if you want to be competitive. Of course, jump into the winter phase, which is December all the way to state. This is where you have a new design or several new designs. You compete, you perfect your driving, you perfect your design, you compete one or two more times, and you're preparing for state. We mentioned here you need to try to compete in 3 to 5 competitions. That's kind of hard to do with the early bird registration, but it's totally doable. We did, I think, 3 last year, plus our league events as well. But it's doable, especially if you're hosting or co-hosting some competitions. And then
Hosting is
obviously,
definitely the easiest way
oh
to
yeah,
get into competitions
yep,
because they're yours. You can get in for free.
you
And
can't turn
also don't
yourself down.
and don't hesitate to send an email to the event partners that are hosting competitions. They have a backlog of teams that are trying to get in as well. But if you're at the point in your season where, man, we've only been able to get one competition and the kids would really like to have another shot at state, like just send out an email and ask.
Yep.
They can expand their competition for you if they have space. So there's always a chance. It doesn't hurt to ask. You may be able to squeeze in 1 or 2 more.
Yeah. And you definitely have to do some planning when it comes to competitions and the early bird situation. You have to plan ahead and think that as well. And then if you're lucky enough to make it to Worlds, that's obviously from the Worlds phase is March till the end of the season, which is late April, early May. And what we do actually right after state, we meet one last time to kind of debrief state, talk about, problems and solutions and how fun it was and the experience and all that stuff. And then we take like 2 or 3 weeks off. We've got spring break during that time period. And then just to kind of give them a little breath, just a breather. And also what's that phrase? Absence makes the heart grow fonder or something like that. Like they're like so ready to come back and get started on working for Worlds. And so during that time period, you are improving all aspects of your program, your design, your driving, your program, your interviews, your notebooks, all of that stuff needs to be perfected for the World Championship. And so those are kind of the 3 phases that we're going to zoom into as we go through this presentation today. And again, those phases might not be the same phases that you guys do. Maybe with this COVID stuff, maybe you're not even starting your season till January. And again, you're just going to have to kind of adjust and whatnot. But that has been what's worked for us. So we're going to jump into parent involvement. This is kind of a touchy subject for a lot of coaches is, allowing parents. And I say, let parents help out as many as you can. I love parents are the lifeline of my program. Not necessarily like the designing and the building and like all of that aspect, but man, we have so much on our plates as coaches and so many things to think about and to organize and whatnot. And if you can delegate some of that stuff to parents, they are more than happy to help out. As long as they understand that you are the boss, like you are the coach and everything kind of runs through you. But definitely have some mentors that come to your practices and assist in different things, assistant coaches, maybe even at competitions, have some helping with crowd control and decorating pits at state and Worlds and, organizing the pizza parties and the hotel accommodations. And at the end of the season, we have an awards banquet. And I just say, hey, who wants to be in charge of that? Parents take it and they do it, and they do a way better job than I would do. And so definitely have as many parents as you can. But the parents that you do have helping out with your actual practices and with your actual teams and your students, you need to set guidelines with them. First and foremost, you are the coach. You are the coach and you run the organization. They are there to assist you and to help you. Their hands need to be off. That's a given, right? They should not be building the robots by themselves off in a corner. Because I know how some parents can be. They're really excited that their kid is on the team and they want their kid to succeed and do well. And so just set those parameters and guidelines. What I end up doing, I kind of mentioned this earlier. I have a parent night for anyone who's interested, just to kind of give an idea of what robotics is and how I run my organization. And then this is how they can apply for the team. Once I have my team set, like once I have my students chosen, I meet with the parents again, just to gather important information from them, get a group text going or remind. We review the game and rules, because the last thing I want is for them to go to competitions and be completely lost and confused. And then we set expectations for them in the crowd. And I felt like I did a good job of that this year, and I usually do. But this past year, apparently, I failed in that department. At least once, I had apparently a parent in the crowd at a competition that was just kind of bad mouthing different teams, and it was frustrating to hear about that. But we met right after right after I got that phone call. I met with my parents, and we had a nice hard conversation about their conduct in the stands and in the crowd. And the last thing we want is little league brawls, right? We don't want parents fighting each other and throwing things on the fields or anything like that. This is student centered, and it's about them. It's not about the parents and whatnot. So,
and for the teams that I help with, some of it is similar and some of it is a little bit different. For the team that I'm head coach for, Teamwork, it's just out of my home. It's out of my basement. It's my son and a couple of his friends, and they get together after school or on weekends and they do their work, and I'm here if they need help. And that's about all there is to it. There's not a whole lot of extra parent involvement other than working with the other boys' parents to make sure that we can get to competitions on time. But with helping out with Brentwood Elementary, it was completely different. And one of my goals for helping out with that program was to be able to have something in place for even the younger kids. So one of the things that we did that was a little bit different than a lot of programs have done, and I believe I've heard of some other programs doing something similar to this, but we ended up having two separate programs where we had our initial parent meeting where anybody who's interested or their kids are interested in robotics at all come and they hear about what it is and how it works and what the competitions are. But one of the things that I found while helping out with some of the summer camps is that some kids just they're not ready for the competition aspect, for the anxiety inducing, adrenaline pumping, driving the robot to the last second. They're just not prepared for that. They would love to build, they would love to learn, they would love to program, but they just don't want to be out on the field yet. And as someone who is highly competitive, that was eye-opening for me. So I wanted to provide a way for kids at our school who still wanted to be a part of the program to be able to come in and learn and do everything that they wanted to do without the added pressure of competition. So we ended up creating a competition team, but then we also had a developmental or non-competition team. And the way that this ended up working out, and this was mainly because the kids that chose to compete ended up being the older kids, and the younger kids that didn't want to compete were all third graders, essentially. We had a huge crop of third graders this last year. We ended up having that non-competitive team be more of a developmental team. So what I did is I took them through all of the curriculum that VEX has available to use, taught them about simple machines, levers, pulleys, inclined planes, taught them some basics about prototyping, and then we got into programming. By the end of the year, they were building a custom robot themselves and programming it to drive figure eights around the classroom floor, going in between chairs and everything. They had a blast. And they did that without having to be in a stadium with thousands of people screaming and carrying on. And they loved it. And it was great. And a couple of them will probably move over to competitive this next year because they've gained the confidence in that type of environment. Whereas with the competition team, we also had another meeting with the parents of the kids on the competition team to talk about what the expectations were at competitions and to really hammer home with the kids and with the parents that there's a reason it's called the teamwork challenge. Mm-hmm. You're there cooperating with the people there. You're not there to beat everyone into the ground.
Right.
So the thing that I tried to stress as much as possible at the very beginning of the season was like, hey, we're all in this together. We're all trying to learn. When we go to these competitions, talk to the other teams, see what you can learn from them, and always, always, always congratulate them after the end of the match, no matter what happens, no matter what mistakes you make, no matter what mistakes they make. This is how we learn.
And be an open book.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think at this time we are going to stop for questions. If anybody has any questions just on what we have hit so far, and we'll just take a quick breather. All right, this next section here, jumping into the fall phase, the season has begun. And if you watched my video from the first day where we went over the Rise Above game manual and different strategies and whatnot, this will be familiar to you. But there's really just a cycle here. And obviously, the very first step, the very first couple of days of your practices, you need to be understanding the game with your students. Spending time in the game manual, watching the videos, maybe watching some YouTube videos of teams that have already put stuff on the field and whatnot. But you need to understand every aspect of the game. Scoring, how do you score a lot of points? What is the max score? How are you getting bonuses with Rise Above? Then once you have understood the game, that's when you start strategizing. And again, we kind of modeled that earlier. Some of my former Eaglebots on the first day with that video, they kind of modeled strategizing, just the discussion that we had that we would have in a practice. And so you just kind of at that point in time need to figure out what your best routes are, where you want your robot to go, what do you want to accomplish? Do you want to go for those 30-point bonuses, the triple stacks, the completed stacks? And some advice that I got after my first year, I remember that just kind of stuck with me. My first year, I think what was the game? Crossover Challenge. It was 5, I guess that'd be 5 seasons ago. We were just falling forward. Like I had no clue what I was doing. And I kind of felt like I was not doing a great job as a coach, but we somehow, luckily, after our third and final competition of the season, we were going to be done in January. Like I was like, I don't know what we're doing. We're going to be done in January. But once we went to that competition, we had a great time and we're like, let's just do another one just for fun. And we were winning and we're like, oh, we might go to state. And then in the finals, they fell apart and we lost. And we're like, okay, now we might actually win. Let's go to one more competition. So we went to another one and we ended up winning it, qualifying for state. And we're just like that was the greatest thing in the entire world. Like we didn't expect anything beyond just qualifying for state. And as the day was going on, my 2 drivers, Wesley and Caleb, who are now going to be freshmen in high school, which is crazy, they just killed it. Like they were just crushing it all day, and they ended up getting 3rd at state, and the top 3 alliances end up qualifying for Worlds. So like then we're just like blown away. Like we just made it to Worlds. Now what? Like what is even Worlds? Like that was beyond our wildest imagination, right? So we get to Worlds and we just bombed completely. Like we did horrible. And we had a blast. Like it was one of the greatest experiences ever, but we just bombed horribly. And one of the frustrating things was at Worlds, we just felt like we had some really tough pairings. And I don't know if you guys remember the crossover challenge, but basically the field was cut in half. And we kind of do our work on this side and the other team would do their work on this side. And then you kind of balanced on a bridge and at the end of the game, which was really exciting. We had a couple matches where teams didn't even show up. And so we're doing everything that we can on our side. Nothing is happening on the other side. And we're getting like half the points that we should be getting. And I remember being frustrated about that. And I was talking to a coach and his advice stuck with me. He said, you need to have your students design the robot. Like, yes, this is a teamwork thing, obviously, but if you want to be competitive, you need to have your students design and build a robot that can essentially do it all, right? And then whatever they can do, whatever their alliances can do is just bonus and on top of it. Now, don't mishear me. I'm not saying like we're going to dominate the field, you just sit in the corner. Like definitely do not agree with that. It is a teamwork thing. But if your robot is capable of doing, like last year's game Squared Away, the tall platform, the low platforms, taking the red cubes over, taking the blue cubes over, sucking up balls and putting them on top. Like if your robot is capable of doing that, then if your partners don't show up or you're paired up with a team that's not so, advanced, then it shouldn't affect you at all. So that's kind of the conversation you need to be having when you're strategizing in step 2 is what do we want? What are all the capabilities that we want our robot to do? Step 3, then of course, once you have your strategy, that's when you start designing your robot. You have to let your strategy guide your design. A lot of resources out there. Definitely be checking YouTube. Typically what I do and what I've trained my students to do, it's kind of funny, is they just go to YouTube, they type in VEX IQ, and then they filter it to the most recent uploads, and they just watch the most recent videos. And so check those out. Reverse engineering is definitely acceptable, and it's okay. We do not expect these students to magically come up with, these brilliant ideas all on their own all the time. It's definitely okay to reference other teams and reference other robots. And then obviously that's where innovation comes in as well. So then step 4, you're building your robot, and you're going to go through that cycle, step 2, step 3, step 4, like several times, several iterations throughout the season until you feel like you have completely perfected it. So obviously, as you're going through this process and this cycle, your students need to be documenting everything. One of the sub teams that we have is the documentation team, and those are the students that they are the ones that just take care of the notebook and essentially just buy into everything about the notebook. And that's kind of the hardest part, is getting students to buy in. And I remember a couple of years ago, I had two students, Ava and Sophie, who didn't want to be part of the documentation team, but I just knew that they would be perfect for it. And I kind of talked to them, and they bought in, and they treated that thing like it was their baby. I mean, they carried it around with them all the time. Any second that they had, spare second that they had, they were diving into that thing. And so everything that you do throughout the season, anything that deals with strategy, design, building, problems that you've encountered, solutions, all of that stuff needs to be documented in your engineering notebook. That is a huge part of this, of engineering in general, and of course this competitive robotics, and of course winning awards. Can't win the design or excellence if you don't have a solid notebook. So if you go to roboticseducation.org and you click on the VEX IQ section and the game resources, and then the awards appendix, you will come up with information about what they expect, like what judges expect for your engineering notebook. And so you can kind of just read through this, and there's a rubric on there. If you're competitive, like I am and like Adam is, like you want to look at the part of the rubric that scores the most points, obviously, right? So check that out, and just kind of let that be the guide for your documentation team. I would print this out for them, set it down right next to their station, their workstation, wherever they're sitting and working, and just, kind of have that there as a reminder as the season goes on, that they're making sure that they include all of these things. It's really
the thing that I would add about the engineering notebook is that it's not meant to be the final perfect copy of the instruction manual in 16 different languages for your robot. It is meant to be the documentation of the messy, awful, terrible process that you've gone through, all of the failures that you've had, all of the parts that you've put together that didn't work, and why it didn't work, and how
that's
it
hard.
didn't work.
That is hard for kids to understand, because they don't like making mistakes, right? And so like they're trained to, this is the final draft. I've done my edits, I've done my revisions. Here's my final draft, and now I'm going to submit it. I mean, they're trained to do that in class, right? I'm a 5th grade teacher. I trained them to do that. And so when you tell your kids for the first time, like, no, use a pen. You need to use a pen. Don't erase any of that stuff. Like, you're crossing stuff. Like, it's going to be messy. It's going to look kind of gross. They want to see your mistakes. They want to see all the failures that you encountered through the process. And so, yeah, that's a good point, Adam. That's a really good point.
And that's not to say that it can't be neat.
Right.
Your handwriting needs to be still legible. We don't want kids just scribbling things out instead of erasing things. If you make a mistake in the notebook, just single line, cross it through. All of the guidelines for what types of things should be in the notebook are right there in the rubric. It tells you exactly what you should have there. And it's important to remember that the notebook is also the history of everything that you've done on this season. And it is going to be something that you'll go back to and reference in upcoming seasons. Because maybe this mechanism that you built for this season doesn't work for this one, but maybe it works for the next one.
Yeah. So we actually, this is one of the benefits of having a good engineering notebook. One of my drivers, Karsten, this last season, he was one of my state drivers on the red team. He, for whatever reason, was carrying the blue team's robot across our robotics room and tripped over something, whatever, and it shattered. The blue robot, not even his team's robot, but the blue robot shattered into a billion pieces. And like, we're all just like, what just happened? And one of my students on the documentation team on the blue team, Claire, she's like, don't worry, I've got the notebook, right? And so she grabs a notebook and so then I was like, Karsten, you need to help them, right? Because you're the one that broke it, like take responsibility. And they put it back together based on the pictures that they had documented on the last several steps. They put it back together in like 15 minutes. It was incredible. Like it was like truly, truly inspiring. It's like, that's why we do these notebooks. One of the reasons why.
And I don't know how well this is going to come through, but I do have my team's notebook from this last year. And if I can line up with the camera correctly, I mean, you can see it's not, they're not fonts. It's not typing quality, but you start with a table of contents. You talk about your team a little bit. And then, that's not the robot that they took to a competition, but it was based on an idea from a robot that they had built 2 years prior. They're like, hey, maybe this sort of mechanism would work for this, and they go through and they test it and they find out that it's terrible.
Yeah.
So they end up starting from scratch and like, okay, we're just going to start from the beginning and build a completely brand new drive base. And they actually did this a couple of times, piece by piece. And then once they get to the point where they're, starting to put other pieces on, everything goes in there. You start working on your program, put your program in there, put all of your strategies in there, some of the math behind what you're trying to do,
Yeah, document everything. I mean, we can't say that enough. Just document every single thing. Literally everything. Yeah. Now we're going to jump into just kind of a strategy discussion. One of the first things, and again, I mentioned this in my video a couple of days ago from the Rise Above game and strategy section. But one of the first couple practices is talking about strategy. So you partner up the students, and they don't even necessarily have to be on the same teams. If you have multiple teams, just partner up the students, give them, this graphic organizer I created for a couple seasons ago for Next Level. But basically just give them the opportunity to come up with different routes. So they'll sketch, different routes on there and how they can get different points and discuss different problems and solutions with that, different scenarios and different outcomes and whatnot. And then just they present it to the rest of their team and just say, hey, this is kind of what we came up with, yada, yada, yada. And then you kind of bounce off. And I think Tyler and Isaac's is the best because it seems realistic and we can get a lot of points and we can yada, 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 right? And so you're just kind of going through that strategy discussion and you're going to let that guide your build, which we talked about earlier. And of course, put that in the notebook.
And I know we're talking about fall and getting started and the build phase and everything now too, but something I also want to point out with these field diagrams, these are insanely useful at competitions. So take that, blow it up, laminate it, give your kids some dry erase markers and use that to determine what your strategies with your alliance partners are. Yeah. They're already used to drawing on these things. They're already used to figuring out what their routes are because they've done it 100 times already.
If there's one thing that I've noticed, you don't take one of those to a competition and your kids just talk with their alliance about what they're going to do, it almost never happens the way it's supposed to happen, right? Like they need to see that visual of the field, like, hey, we're going to start in this starting position and we're going to go over here and grab this and grab that and do that. What do you guys want to do? Draw it out, do that. And then it almost always happens the way they plan it out because they've kind of visualized it and they've done like a trial run through the lamination there.
And if you're lucky enough to get to Worlds, odds are you're going to be paired with somebody who doesn't speak English anyway.
Yes.
So it's super helpful at Worlds.
Yes. The next slide here, we're talking about the teamwork challenge when it comes to practice. What do we do in practice to get better at the teamwork aspect, the teamwork challenge aspect? And again, I have just another picture of a graphic organizer that we created for the Next Level game a couple seasons ago. And basically, this is just setting goals for the teams, for the students who are driving. I don't know if you guys can kind of see that, but basically you have your drivers and different tasks that you want them doing. So maybe for this example right here, I still can't quite read that. That's okay. But I think it was something like start in the starting position. I'm going to have Isaac start in the starting position. He's going to grab the tall hub off of, or the bonus hub, whatever it's called, and go push those 3 orange hubs into the scoring zone and stack it on top. And I want to be able to do that in 8 seconds or whatever. Just kind of set those goals. And it's just that drill over and over and over and over again. Do it again. Do it again. Oh, I got it in 9 seconds. I was so close. Or, oh, I knocked the bonus hub off and didn't work. So it's just kind of building that muscle memory and doing drills. And of course, the kids like that because it's goal setting. You don't always want to just do matches over and over and over again. Like, yeah, that's fun doing a full minute match and trying to get as many points as you can, but doing drills just like you would do, like, at a basketball practice, you don't scrimmage the entire time. When you're at football practice, you don't do, 11 on 11 games the entire time. You do drills. And that's what this sheet was helpful for. Of course, at the end, there's, the important part is reflecting, right? For these kids is what are the ways that they can improve? How can they improve their drive? How can they shave off a couple of seconds? What are some ways, or maybe a different route to get the same amount of points, but faster? And of course, obviously, how can we improve the strategy and the design as the season goes on? And then put it in the notebook.
And one thing that you can do with these, if you have the space, and I know not everybody has a room that they can always use. Not everybody has wall space in the room that they use. But if you do, put those records up on the wall, put them on a board so that they can see them, and then they can work each practice to beat those high scores.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's nothing more exciting than having a high score that's been up for a month and a half fall finally. And then it's crazy because what happens next is they start beating it regularly.
Oh,
and that thing that they thought was this like impenetrable barrier that we can't possibly score any more than this now becomes their new normal.
Mm-hmm.
So with my kids, I've definitely seen, like, you see growth throughout the year, and it doesn't matter how well they do or what mistakes they make. They're always, down on themselves. They're a little bit critical of what their performance was. And one of my favorite things to do with my teams is to, towards the end of the season, we always try to make sure that we have a early competition. And if it's not a competition, at least try to do some sort of like film scrimmage, so that at the end of the season, I can go back and show them their very first matches so that they can see how far that they've come. So they have a little bit more confidence going in, like, hey, before we were getting, 32 points and now we're getting 112 points.
Yeah. And put that in your notebook too. Like, just go back and reflect on the notebook. Like, this is what we did at this competition in November. We were averaging 32 points or whatever. And now look at us. We're heading to state and we're averaging 117 points or whatever example you just said. And yeah, they need to see that because growth is hard for them to see, just like with your own kids, you see them every single day, you don't see the growth, but when you see your cousin from Kentucky that you haven't seen in 3 years, you see that growth. And so it's nice for the kids to kind of have those reminders and pointers there. So
especially if you've had the kids for a while, you can go back and show them matches from 2 years ago.
Oh yeah.
Like, look how happy you were getting 3 points, barely able to drive the robot, and now you're upset that you're not clearing the field. Like,
right.
Get a little bit of perspective. I
love it. Next slide here. We're still kind of in the fall winter phase, because remember, you're doing these things throughout the season. It's not just like, hey, only practice teamwork stuff in the fall phase. No, you're definitely doing that in the winter phase as well, and even in the world's phase too. But here we're talking about the skills challenge. Obviously, what do we do in practices in order to prepare for skills. Because skills, I mean, I can't say it enough. I tell coaches, every coach that I talk to at competitions that's asking for advice or whatever, skills, like skills is the way to go. It is hard to be the top two teams at a competition to qualify for state. If that's one of your performance goals, if one of your performance goals is to qualify for state, it's not super easy to be the top two teams out of 30 or whatever, or top three if you include the excellence as well. But at the end of the season, and again, this was like a hard concept for me to understand at the beginning of my career, was that skills can actually get you to state at the end of the season. And so practicing skills is really important, especially when it comes to programming. If you are not touching programming, you are doing your team a disservice for many reasons, obviously, because programming is an important skill to learn, but also because you're leaving a bunch of points off the table. Even if you get like minimal programming points, you're going to rise up in the rankings simply because that adds on to your total score there. So get your programming going for sure. What we do after Christmas break, so we're starting the winter phase, we're kind of getting close to the end of our state bot and whatnot. We need a program. And so we actually add in a third practice in the week, and we make it optional. We generally practice Tuesdays and Thursdays after school for, I think, like an hour and a half. But then after Christmas break, when we're ready to program in depth, we have an optional Wednesday practice. And I allow anybody to program. If I have, out of my 14 kids, I was typically getting 11, 12, 13 of them coming to those optional practices because they just think it's fun. And I'll let anyone do it, honestly. So, but when it comes to driving, I know some people have different opinions on this, and again, that's okay. It's whatever works within your organization. But for me, my thought process is, if you really, really want to be competitive, you've got to have your set drivers. It's obviously okay to have backup drivers and whatnot, but and I think I used this example last year, even, I'm not going to replace Peyton Manning just to get my backups in all the time. Like, he's my best quarterback. I'm going to play him. And at the same time, your students understand that they have roles, specific roles on the team, and they're bought into those specific roles. If they're not as good of a driver, they don't want to let their teams down, and they want to say stuff like, hey, let our drivers drive because that gives us a better chance of winning, because they've done the most practicing, they're the most committed with their driving and whatnot. So definitely you want to solidify your two drivers. We create just a spreadsheet of their daily driving and their programming attempts and their scores and what went well and what didn't go well, and constantly writing notes and all of that. Obviously, that's really good for practicing leading up to a competition. And obviously, don't skip the notes section. Kids a lot of times want to skip that section because it's I don't know, not as fun to write, what I did wrong or what didn't go well or whatever. But the reflection part is really, really important. And then, as always, put that in the notebook.
Yeah, all of that reflection is so important, especially looking back at what you were doing previously in the season, because you might come to the point where you need to look back, and maybe a mistake that you were making early on might actually be the start of a new strategy that might get you more points now that you're a better driver.
Mm-hmm.
So you never know where you're going to find the inspiration. So it is super, super important to write down everything that you do. And my programs that I work with are a little bit different, and basically because, like, with teamwork, there's 2 boys, sometimes 3 boys, and that's it. Like, it's not a huge team. They're very small teams. They work together in pairs or as threes. And because there's only 3 of them, they can get significant amounts of time in practice. If you've got 8 kids on the team and everybody wants to drive, like, that's great. That's fine. They all get to drive and have a good time. But how much time do they really get to practice to get better at driving that robot if they're constantly sharing time with 7 other kids? It's really difficult to do that.
Yeah.
And on the other side with Brentwood, we had teams of 5 each. And originally we were going to start with handing out roles, but at the time we were also rebuilding the program. There weren't any, um, we basically had no veterans coming back. There were a couple of kids who had worked with a kit before and built the Clawbot once and drove it for like an hour, and that's about it. So since we had to start from scratch, I ended up actually not doing the roles quite as strictly up front so that everybody could get some experience in all of the different things. So I had everybody write in the notebook. I had everybody do some design and some building and some driving. But as we got closer and closer towards the end of the season, the kids actually started sorting themselves out into the things that they enjoyed. And most often, the things that they enjoyed were the things that they were already good at.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also add on the programmers. Usually, the kids that program are the kids that want to program, the kids that enjoy programming. But I would also recommend that if you can, if you have enough interest, I would highly recommend having your programmer be a pair so that they always work with one other person, so that they always have somebody else looking at the code. And this is something that we do professionally all the time. It's called pair programming, where sometimes you're trying to debug a problem and you can't see it. And it's just because you've been in it for too long and you're not thinking quite clearly. And maybe it's just some small little thing that you're overlooking, but this other person, they're going to see it, or at least they have a better chance at seeing it. And then you also have someone to bounce ideas off of, and you can start talking through all of the different motions and the movements that the robot's going to make, and what logic that you need to build into that robot, and which sensors that you should maybe consider adding to the robot that might make your programming easier. You know, I highly recommend teaching the kids how to use the touch LEDs. If you're not using touch LEDs to start your autonomous program, do that. Like,
Yes.
if there's nothing else you do with the sensors, start your autonomous programs and in programming skills with the touch LED. Like, change it whatever color you want, I don't care. But that way, if your kids are fumbling with the brain and trying to select the program and they accidentally mess up and they didn't know they were holding the X button and turned it off, like, you could lose a lot of time in a match. So do that. Also,
Well, and figure out your weaknesses as coaches too. Like for me, my
absolutely.
biggest weakness as a coach is programming. Like I try so hard to understand it, and I probably drive Adam nuts with all of my probably stupid questions to him, but like I just don't get it. It's a foreign language to me. And I was fortunate this past year. This is again kind of going back to the parent volunteers or just parent involvement in general. I had a father of one of my students who was a programmer or whatever, probably whatever Adam does, and and like totally love this stuff. And so I said, hey, why don't you download VEX code, IQ blocks, and play with it at home and see if if you get it, if you like it. Obviously, he didn't have a robot at home, but he played around with it. And then I just kind of let him lead my optional Wednesday practices because he gets it. He totally got it. And so he was teaching the kids and me essentially. And so now I feel so much more confident going into next season, being able to teach the concepts that he was able to teach me and the kids as well. And so there's some more parent involvement. Ask your parents. I mean, I'm sure there's at least one or two of them that get this stuff or are willing to learn how to do this stuff. And he was all in. Like, he was watching YouTube videos and sending me all sorts of links. Like, he was all in. It was so cool.
And in that vein, just remember that you're properly setting the expectations for the parent volunteers, that they're not in there writing the program for your kids.
Right.
So they're in there, they're teaching the concepts, and that's expected.
Mm-hmm.
These kids can't go in and learn to be expert roboticists with no teaching whatsoever.
Right.
You need to teach them how to build lift systems and linkages and drivetrains. You need to teach them the concepts of programming and what loops and branches are, function
well,
calls,
the game manual says that. Like, it literally says that is your role as a coach to do those things. But here's the thing. How can that be my role as a coach if I don't understand it to begin with? And so that's where all these resources come into play, and asking other coaches and experienced coaches and parents and whatnot, because you've got to be that first line there. So I think we're going to stop right here for another load of questions. If you have any, we'll just take a quick break here and then we'll jump right back in. All right, welcome back. We are now in the worlds phase. If you are lucky enough to get past state and make it to the world championship, which is now going to be in Dallas, Texas. Boy, talk about travel, and that's just a whole new topic is getting to worlds. We were really fortunate to have worlds pretty much in our backyard down in Louisville, 4-hour drive.
That was fantastic. At least we're not traveling to another continent.
Yeah, right. That is good. But one of the fun things that we do in our program that I got this idea from Steve Hassenplug a few years back is creating the game Phase 10. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that card game, but basically there are 10 phases, and they progressively get more difficult as you go on through the game, and you can't move on to the next phase until you've completed the first phase and the second phase and whatnot. And so this is the one that we created last year for Squared Away. And it's really, honestly, it's the kids loved it. I mean, they went nuts when I pulled this out. It's so much fun. It's very interactive. And really the whole purpose of it is to prepare your drivers for any and all circumstances that might happen at a competition or at Worlds, at state or at Worlds. And so, like one of them we have on there, we have I pull my students off the side who are not my drivers, pull them off the side and say, all right, guys, listen, you're going to scream as loud as you can, like in their ears, just go nuts, try to distract them and whatnot. And the drivers obviously don't know. And then we go, all right, 3, 2, 1, go. And the crowd goes nuts, right? And it's just to kind of prepare for that setting and the nerves and just ignore the noise, ignore the crowd and all that. What are some other ones on there? I can't quite see.
I can go through and read from the top. So Phase 1 is crowd counts down from 5 when there are 10 seconds left.
Oh man, classic like basketball student section move, right?
Yep, absolutely. One robot doesn't start until there's 15 seconds left.
Oh man, listen, that kind of happened to us actually at state this past in the championship, which was
it did.
Oh man, I don't want to relive this, but I will. I'll relive it right now. So my red team, Karsten and Elsa, they had the absolute worst luck all season long when it came to the finals. First competition we went to in November, they get up to the finals, and they're paired up with my blue team. They get up to the finals, they go to start, and their robot's not working. Their axle had fallen out of their drivetrain. So Karsten, bless his heart, is just fumbling with the robot for the entire minute while the blue team's doing their thing. Super frustrating, but they didn't even get to do a run because the match was over by the time they fixed it. Next competition, they did fine. Another competition, they were in first and, going into the finals, and their partner, who was actually, this was in the league finals, their partner who were my world champion drivers of the year before, just incredible drivers, went to go put the green cube up top and it fell off. So they lost that. They just had the worst luck ever. Right. So at state this past year, they're doing really, really well. They finished the teamwork matches in first, and they're the number one, whatever alliance, the last one to go. And everything seems to be going really well, right? Karsten is just a smooth operator, just a great attitude, love him. And he's driving, and all of a sudden his robot shuts off. Or it just like stops driving. I'm like, what is going on? And he's just kind of like starting to get frantic. He puts his controller down, picks the robot up, sets it back. I see him kind of messing with the brain a little bit, keeps going. By this point, they've lost, 15 seconds of time. And they ended up losing the state finals by, I think, like 3 points. And they, could have easily gotten those 3 points had they had 15 extra seconds. And so I asked them afterwards, what happened? Like, why did your robot not? He goes, Mr. Simons, the cube corner hit the X on the brain. It exited me out of driving. And I was like, no, like that's not possible, right? Sure enough, like we stuck a cube right up to it. It couldn't have been more perfect. Like the corner of the cube was right at the X and just hit the X, turn them up. I mean, you can't prepare for that sort of stuff. And he was so mad, at that point we were still thinking that Worlds was gonna go on. And so he built this cage around his brain. So like that couldn't happen ever again. But there again, like he had a great smile on his face, and Elsa, bless her heart, had a great smile on her face too. And they had a great time, but they just had the worst luck in the world when it came to finals. And it didn't matter how many times we played phase 10. You can't always prepare for everything. So maybe we'll try to throw that in next year in phase 10. Like I'll just jump on the field at the 32nd point, hit the X on the brain, and figure out what to do. Figure it out.
I mean, if nothing else, it prepares them to expect things to go wrong and to keep their cool.
And they will,
while these things go wrong.
Yeah. And your alliances will let you down too. Like we definitely let our alliance down in that situation. Like I'm sure, and I don't remember who we were paired with, but I'm sure they weren't very happy with us. But there are times when your alliances just let you down. And it's, important that you train your kids to respond in those situations with a happy heart and a positive attitude. And so, this phase 10 game kind of helps prepare for that. Driving drills, like we said, just like you would do in sports, you focus on specific drills, build that muscle memory. What are you going to do in these specific situations? So, and then of course, put that in the notebook.
So one thing I would add with the driving drills as well, one thing that really can separate some of the good teams from the great teams is get your kids to notice what those little things are that they do with the robot all the time that they could automate.
Oh yeah.
So there's some really simple, easy examples. So one of the things is always, if you're scoring something that's stacked on top of something else, you're going to be raising that arm or whatever your mechanism is to that same height every time.
Yeah.
So there's no reason to leave that up to manual button pushing. Make it automated. Just hit a button, goes up, and it stops right where it's supposed to be every single time.
Yeah.
So my kids last year programmed so that at the very start of the match, they would press the F up button and the robot would spin back up, grab the red cube, and then turn and be ready to grab the next green cube. And you'd have that red cube in a second and a half, if that, and you'd already be ready to go.
And it was automatic every time.
Yeah, it would work every single time. You press the button,
driver error
always does it.
Yep.
Nope. And the year before that with Next Level, you could easily do that with getting the first yellow hub off of the top.
Yeah.
If you started on the right side, you could just press the button, it would turn, raise the arm, grab the yellow hub, turn, and then go about your business. So you can take mistakes that your kids make and they can turn them into things that make them even better because they can engineer around their own failures or their own inadequacies.
Yeah.
So a lot of times just driving straight is a challenge. And that's just the nature of the analog sticks.
Yeah.
But you can program the controller such that not driving straight is impossible. So think about those things that can be automated, that you can engineer around, and it doesn't have to be programmed. It can be a physical thing. If you're having trouble keeping a riser centered on the robot, build a structure around it to hold it better.
Yep. Yeah, this is robotics, right? Like that's the whole point of robotics is how can robots help us be more efficient and do a better job? This isn't a remote control competition. And so, yeah, that's something that I wish I had known my first and second and third season. We didn't start doing that. What do they call? Is that called teleops? That's what we've always kind of said, but I don't know if that's what it's called.
Well, it's remote operation.
There you go, remote operation.
Controller. But
that's what we started doing that this last year, and it was so helpful for my drivers. All 4 of which were brand new drivers this year, by the way, because my other 4 had all moved on from the world championship team to the middle school. So I was fresh. I had fresh drivers. And so they did that. And, it was as simple as they go up to the first green cube, double tap, they hit their, I don't even remember, top right up twice. And it went to the perfect height for the tall platform. They just turn and set it down. and came to another green cube, hit it once, and it lifts to the perfect height, set it down. And that just made it 1,000 times easier for them. So good point.
Mhm.
Good point, Adam.
Yeah, and that's another reason why we keep pointing out, write things down in the notebook, because if
Yeah.
you're going back through the notebook and seeing the mistakes that you've made repeatedly, those are perfect candidates to try and automate around or engineer around those mistakes to make it so that you can't make that mistake.
Yeah.
Build your robot or change your robot so that it has to do the thing that you want it to do, instead of failure being an option for the robot.
Right.
And you're always building, you're always making improvements. This is a continual cycle. We're not just building and programming at the beginning of the season and practicing like crazy with that one robot and never changing it. Make some changes.
Yeah, another quick example of that before we move on to the next slide. Jumping into my director role, I went and watched a couple of the other elementary teams in our district compete, and I noticed one of the drivers on Walker's team, absolute sweetheart, but she just her fingers were heavy, right? So she goes to lower the green cubes on the platform, and she's just slamming it down, and it's falling off every time. And that would be a perfect candidate. I mean, she was doing that every time. A perfect candidate to just put in a quick code. You hit the button once and it lowers it, I don't know, 2 inches, and then you just back out instead of just holding the control or holding the button down until you slam it and it falls off and you break your passive claw and all that stuff. It's another perfect candidate. All right, let's move on. State and world prep. So something that we do as a team is we have, again, another kind of graphic organizer that just asks a bunch of questions. So like last year, for example, it was like, can your Alliance robot get the tall platform? Can your Alliance robot get the low platforms? Can your Alliance robot carry 2 cubes at once? Can your Alliance robot get balls on top of cubes? Whatever, right? And you're saying yes, no, yes, no. You're coming up with every single possible robot, possibility that you might be paired up with at state and at worlds. And with that type of robot that you might be paired up with, what is your strategy? Like, what is the route that you're going to take? What are you going to be doing? If we were paired up with a team last year that could get the tall platform, then we don't need to do that. And we can focus on doing something else, right? But if we're paired up with a team that can't do the tall platform, can't get the low greens, they can only bring the reds or the blues over, then our strategy is going to be, we'll get the greens. We'll take care of the greens. You take care of the reds and blues and whatnot. So,
let's talk a little bit about this year's game. So, I mean, this year you have risers, so you don't necessarily have as many potential possibilities.
Right.
You have basically how many risers
can they lift 3?
Your other team's robot lift? Can they lift 3? Can they stack a third one? Like, even if they can only lift one at a time, are they capable of getting high enough to stack that one on the top? Or can they at least push risers into goals to complete the rows? So you have to determine what it is, that's possible that robots can do. Like, maybe you'll find a way to build a robot that can carry 6 risers all at once. And you can start stacking things multiple at a time. I wouldn't be surprised if we see something like that in the next, 6 to 10 months.
Yeah. So, in order to kind of get those ideas, check out YouTube. Like we've mentioned many, many times, you should be perusing YouTube. There are many, many, many teams who just spill all of their stuff out on YouTube. And it's a great way to see new strategies, things that maybe your kids didn't think about or wouldn't think about. So just kind of be working on that. Go to YouTube and type in VEX IQ and then kind of filter it to most recent. And it should show all the recent rise above videos there. So I just, kind of on the slide here, I say create a document outlining your strategy depending on your alliance's design. That's what we've been talking about. They can help. They should always be able to help. There's kind of discussion on the forums this past year about just making teams kind of sit in the corner and you do all the work. And I don't know. I just don't agree with that, because that's not what this is designed for. They can always help. Like, okay, in Squared Away, maybe they can't get any of the greens. Maybe they actually kind of stink at even bringing the reds and blues over. But like, you still have your role. Don't ever just tell them to sit in the corner. You have your role, and they can contribute some way or another, right? And plus, like, those are the teams that maybe can't do any of that stuff. They look up to you, and they're like thrilled about being paired with a team that can do a lot of stuff. And if you give them that opportunity to partner with you, like, that's just going to make their day. They're just going to think it's the greatest thing in the world. And so,
real quick story on that, actually. I've always told my kids, like, if you're paired with a team that looks like they may be holding you back, I want you to go out of your way to pull them up in the rankings. And not just pull them up in the rankings just because you're so awesome, but I want you to pull them up in the rankings because you give them something important to do. Teach them something new. Give them a job that they can say, like, hey, we can do that. And not only can we do that here in this match, but we can do that in upcoming matches. And just having a team and having kids tell you, like, hey, how's your day going? And finding out, like, oh, it's not going so well. Our scores aren't very good right now. And like, well, hey, how about if we do in this strategy, you guys can handle this portion. And in your practice runs, find something that they can do, that they can help with, because you can't clear the field all by yourself, except in VRC skills. And VRC skills, you can clear it yourself.
Not anymore.
Well, for a little while. But you're not going to be able to stack 9 stacks all by yourself. You just can't. There's not enough time. There's not enough, like, the constraints on building the robot, just, it's not going to allow it. So you need the other teams to give you points. And even if they give you 1 point, one riser in a scoring zone, that is totally worth it. And that 1 point might be the difference between you making the finals or not. And in that one match, the story that I was talking about, it was hilarious at the time because they worked together and they talked about it, but they didn't have enough time to practice what the strategy was. And this was 2 years ago. But they get started, and we gave them their job to do and everything, but they were so, like, in awe of what we were doing that they just stopped. And they just weren't doing anything. I'm like, oh no, people are going to think we told them not to do anything. Like, no, they had a job they were supposed to do.
That's funny. But yeah, there's always something for them to do. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. There's always something, even 1 point, 2 points. It's totally worth them doing something. And with the field bigger this year, there's, and like you said, it's not possible, I don't think, for you to get all 9 stacks, triple stacks. Like, they can work on their side. Like, this year's game, like, you probably will focus on one side, maybe getting the oranges, and they can focus on the other side, getting the turquoise or the teals or whatever. So,
Well, and the flip side to that is also, there's nothing that's going to turn off a kid to robotics more than being told, just sit there, I'll do it. And that's the last thing we want for these kids.
That defeats this whole initiative. All right. And the final slide we have here is just a picture of a couple of my former students. This was them walking out on the world finals stage in 2019. Again, just one of the coolest experiences ever. And I talk about, winning the world championship and how it was just a once in a lifetime opportunity for these kids and for myself as a coach. But that process was not easy. Like, it was not just a home run every time. Like, there were millions of failures along the way. And this became kind of our catchphrase all season long. It's become kind of just the theme of our program. In robotics, failure is an option. It's part of the process. We use our mistakes as stepping stones to the next success. So that's your job as the coach, is to kind of teach that to the students. Like, yes, you will fail. Like, society says, failure is not an option, right? But the reality is, when it comes to robotics, failure is an option. In fact, it's part of the process of becoming better and reaching your goals and achieving your performance goals that you want. And And that's how we were able to accomplish what we accomplished that season, is because I had a bunch of great leaders and great personalities on the team that embraced those failures instead of shutting down and crying about it. And that's what led to just the greatest season ever. And so it's just a cool picture of a couple of my boys, Tyler and Isaac. He's the boy on the right side there, just completely. And I guess the irony in this picture is that he was a super quiet, shy, timid boy. And here he is, how many people are at Worlds? Like 30,000, and like on this stage in front of 30,000 people, just pointing out like, yo, what's up? I see you, mom. I see you, dad, up there. He's just the coolest kid in the world. And it's because he's gained all the confidence in the world through those failures and through those mistakes. And I just love that picture, and I love that phrase. And that's kind of what we remember.
It's honestly the biggest thing that these kids may take from robotics.
Yep.
Because this is how life works.
Yes.
We make mistakes, we learn from them. Sometimes other people make mistakes and we learn from their mistakes.
Right.
But either way, we're all stumbling through all of it.
Yeah.
And you learn how to get better, and it helps you gain confidence in everything that you do.
Yep. That's just something that the year-end banquet, that's what my kids, especially after that season, it was really just kind of neat. I had random kids kind of just speak up and share about their experience. And, obviously they shared about Worlds and winning the excellence there and how great that was. But the one takeaway that all of them shared about was just how confident they felt about themselves now. And because of those mistakes. And man, I can't tell you. I mean, I cried like 3 different times during that awards banquet. I was an absolute mess, because that's how you've had success, right? Like, yes, we had some cool performance successes, but that was the true success right there. And man, it just gives me goosebumps even just thinking about it and talking about it, because it's such an important thing that kids need these days. It's just that confidence in themselves and the ability to push through and persevere. So that is our session on competitiveness. And again, I don't, these are things that have worked for our organizations and our programs, and may not necessarily work for you. Take from this what you want. We are in an open book, and feel free to contact us. We've got Facebook. We're in all the groups and the forums and all that stuff, or email or whatever. But we love helping, and we love sharing, and we love, all that stuff. A lot of times you think teams that are really good, they just like keep it like, this is my information, I don't want to share. No, we're open books, man. Like we will give it. We are Team Indiana. Like we want to be the best stinking state / country in the entire world. And part of that process is sharing and helping each other. So we'll sign off here. Adam, I don't know if you want to say anything else.
Nope, just thanks. And again, if there's anything that you guys have any questions about, or even tips for us,
yes,
I would love to hear it. Please reach out.
We want to get better too.
We can do to all get better together is going to be better for everyone.
Yep. All right. Take care, guys.
Yep.